Very good morning to each one of you. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, often says, "We cannot change what we are unaware of, and once we are aware, we cannot help but change it." We at the Science Policy Forum attempt to bring to your awareness one very important yet often ignored issue that we so strongly need to change. Well, some estimates indicate that nearly 30%, or in some disciplines, even more scientists globally are women. But this is not what expert speaker lists at many scientific meetings across a range of disciplines indicate. And more often than not, conferences invite more men than women speakers. In many egregious cases, the speaker panel is entirely devoid of women, making them all male conferences or what we call manferences, or all male panels or manels. This casual chat with Dr. Rajeswari Pillai Rajagopalan is an attempt to get answers to some pressing questions on a hot topic that is trending with the hashtag Say No to Manels. Dr. Pillai, who is the head of the Nuclear and Space Policy Initiative at the Observer Research Foundation, has been vociferously campaigning against all male panels or manels on social media and other fora. Welcome to you, dear ma'am, to this conversation where we dissect the problems with, about, and around manels.
Thank you
So,
so
ma'am,
much.
welcome to
Thank you,
you.
Janice, for having me.
Yes. We will start with the first question in terms of what the lockdown has brought to us. The lockdown has definitely increased the number of online discussions and panels. However, the excuses of non-availability of female experts and selection of what they call the best in the field, irrespective of gender, is often used to justify panels to such an extent that we have often seen panels to discuss the problems of women. So, what do you think could be the underlying reason for such gender exclusion?
Thank you, first of all, having this for this conversation, and it's a very timely topic that, as you suggested. So manuals are not anything new; they are not a new phenomena, and either neither are the efforts to call out manuals in a sense. So manuals have always existed in the society, but they clearly have gained greater visibility, especially now under the lockdown situation, because everyone is trying to showcase that they are trying to do so many discussions, online webinars, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, that effort to do organized panels has gone up, and therefore you are actually beginning to see a lot of these events which are completely male dominated in a sense. So it's not something that is new, that has already happened, but because it is lockdown and everybody is trying to put it out there that they are, and therefore we are seeing all of a sudden this burst of panels in a sense. But it has always been there, and it is a reflection of the social bias that has prevailed in our societies for decades or even centuries in a sense. We are beginning to now call out manels again, because the social media, I believe, provides us with an effective tool to call out these panels. It is an effective tool as far as we can use it in a sense. It is effective to the extent that our efforts are being heard and seen to a large extent. But otherwise, I would say that panels are a reflection of the blindness towards this particular bias. So I would say blindness because many don't even recognize this is anything wrong with what they're doing. For instance, over the past few months, I have spoken to many of the organizers of these panels, and it doesn't even occur to them that they are doing anything wrong. They're just not conscious of the fact that they don't have any women on the panel, and there is something wrong about it. And I think most recently you have had some online seminars kind of thing, or a summit on China, Pakistan, and so on and so forth, where they had dozens of men. And the fact is that they're not even the top line experts on the field. But whereas there are equally good or even more qualified and substantial women experts on China, on some of the other subjects, but they're clearly not given a space, not given a chance to voice their. And the worst is that this particular TV channel which did this came out defending with the silliest of arguments, saying that time zone issue. And I was like, in a lockdown situation, it should have made it easier for women to be part of this kind of conversation. But sadly, this is not the case anymore at this point of time. This is because I think there is a larger problem, which is that many of these meetings and conferences are organized by men, typically in most cases, and they simply call out their immediate friends, peers, so to say, with whom they already know. And it's essentially a small clique out there. There is a small clique of people, so they call each other out for these kind of conferences and panels, but they just do not seem to be making that extra effort to expand their circle of experts and peers that they can kind of cultivate and nurture in the field.
I think that is very right, ma'am. The kind of excuses that you see very often, do you feel that, moving ahead with these, when you hear these excuses, that this manual is actually a superficial manifestation of a more systemic, chronic, and a much complex problem? And how
Uh,
important do you think it is to provide visibility to professional women and change the public perception that, subject and technical experts can be women too? Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. So manners, like I said, are a reflection of the patriarchal society that we have had, and the norms, therefore, that have prevailed as part of the patriarchal society. And it's therefore very, very deep rooted in the Indian case. Therefore, it is going to take a lot of sustained effort to change this and bring in diversity and balance in our conversations. But so far, the repeated efforts that have to try and engage the organizers and convey the message that there is a need to make panels more diverse, bring in different voices, different perspectives. These have been met with scant success. Not everybody has agreed to this, and I think you and I have encountered this problem many a time. Nevertheless, and because of that, I would say this has to continue, because the absence of women mean that a significant expertise is lost simply because of gender bias, in a sense. An entire body of work done by women are ignored or lost because they are not given that space or a platform to talk about and how they can actually contribute to that particular debate, for instance, and come up with possible solutions. So you are ignoring an entire body of work because of your gender bias. And therefore, I would say, I think this needs to be a sustained effort on our part to have diversity, balance, and inclusiveness if you want to have more nuanced debates and discussions on the subject. Manners as are so skewed and so unhealthy that it has to stop. So I think this is an effort, ongoing effort, which has to be sustained. And I commend your effort in taking up this policy issue in a sense.
I truly feel that diversity is the only way that science can grow. And very often, manual is not just about exclusion. There is a lot more in terms of diversity. Yes, that's rightly said. Moving on, let's look at some deeper factors. Like do you feel that manuals are just a microcosm of poor female representation in leadership positions? And if yes, how do you think we can enhance women participation and probably bring more women to come forward from their roles behind the scenes?
No, it's you're absolutely right. For instance, I think absence of women in senior levels and leadership positions affect to a large extent and continue with this practice of unhealthy manners and so on and so forth. But the question is, can a couple of women breaking the glass ceiling, so to say, change the role of women in general, or even within smaller domains like international relations or security studies, technology studies, and national security studies? But I think even though there is an increase in the number of women in IR and security studies as compared to 20 years ago, when more than 20 years ago when I started my field, the numbers begin to dwindle as one looks at the higher levels. The number of women, for instance, graduating from higher international studies has seen an uptick, has been on an increase over the years. But this is not necessarily reflected in the leadership or management roles within think tanks or even government bureaucracies. And this is also seen in the number of women, for instance, absent in the senior executive positions or mentoring or supervisory roles in think tanks and so on and so forth. So while women make a sizable number in pure numerical terms in think tanks and policy world, their upward mobility to senior and management positions have continued to remain an issue. And I think having female leaders and peers is very, very important, because it can get lonely otherwise. And there are plenty of men who will try and bring you down and don't give you that opportunity. I've had so many occasions, even as late as in 2016, when someone, a fairly senior scientist who had retired a few years ago, I was there at NIAS, National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. I was in their campus for a women's empowerment sort of a conference workshop being done by the Indian Institute of Science and IIT Kharagpur. So this was part of it. So that evening, this gentleman saw me and he said, so you're here for the tomorrow's meeting. I told Dr. So-and-so not to invite you for that meeting. I said, that's your loss. And then he turns around and he says, so are you an alumni of IIT? I said, no, I'm not. So how come you're here? I said, I'm here for this particular women's empowerment workshop that is happening tomorrow, whole day. Oh, have the standards of IIT stooped so low that you people bring you? I said, stop. That this is just not acceptable to me that you speak to me like this. He said, oh, I'm just joking. I said, this is not a matter of joke. This is not a substance issue for joke, and I don't take it. You know that I respect you and I consult you and so on and so forth. I said, so that's the kind of mindset. And this is like happened to me too, like just 4 years ago when I kind of made reasonably, name my name and kind of thing with my work in terms of publications, conferences, and so on. So there are men always who will try and pull you down. So therefore, it is important for you to have female leaders as well as peers that you can talk to, because like I said, the journey can get very lonely. So it is important for you to have female leaders who can help you bridge some of these issues, in a sense, the gap that you see in these kind of discussions.
That is amazing to hear the kind of strength that you have to deal with a lot of this, ma'am. I think more women often need to just shun away the criticism and then move ahead, and that's the only way forward. I would like to take you through another question in terms of, while we criticize these manel organizers, do you think these panelists and the participants, attendees in these manels, also have a role to play in addressing the problem? If do you think if these eminent experts and practitioners decline to be a part of manels, it would also send a very strong message to the community at large, and in terms of the kind of action that has to be taken? Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think it could help the case a great deal if the speakers and panelists are also cognizant of this particular issue of manners and do not accept invitations if the panels are not inclusive or balanced or diverse. But everyone appears to be in a sort of a rat race at this point of time, and so they do not want to miss out opportunities. I've seen very few men who recognize this and say that without appropriate representation that I'll not be part of such and such panel. To the point, I see repeat offenders in a sense. The last few months I've been sort of a warrior, so to say, on Manel's issues, and many a time I see the same faces on repeated panels, whether it is something on UN Security Council or something on China, something on nuclear issues. They are all the same panel experts that you have there, same men, and they haven't recognized that this is a part of a problem. So to the extent that one person was asking the other day, hey, I keep hearing this new term called manels. What is it? What does it mean? So, and this is a senior level professor who was talking about it, who has had international exposure, and yet the person doesn't even feel the need to be. So that's why I talked about the blindness towards the gender bias that's so prevalent in our society, that is so deep rooted that it doesn't feel that they are doing anything wrong at all. So it's the speakers and the panelists have an equal responsibility as the organizers in addressing this particular issue, in a sense.
Ma'am, do you also feel that, when you talk about this kind of awareness that has to be created, how important do you think it is for the organization itself to have a clear-cut policy that goes against manels, not just in terms of, organizing, but also in terms of participations for its employees?
Yeah. No, absolutely. This is very, very important. Every organization should have a policy of no manels and the need to have an inclusive gender and age-wise balance and so on and so forth. Luckily, I belong to an organization, ORF, Observer Research Foundation, that had taken a policy decision on this subject well before it became the hot issue that it has become currently today. So at ORF, we have always, for instance, we bring in diversities of various kinds. Age and gender have always had a prominent role in determining the panelists, but also in terms of the overall participation and so on and so forth. But I think it is essential for every organization. The management of the organization need to be sensitive. So the sensitization of the leadership and the management is extremely important, and that could help a great deal if women are also part of the management. But it is important for an organization to provide for an inclusive and balanced work environment, because it instills essentially different perspectives and viewpoints, and that gives you a wider range of perspectives on any issue that you're trying to address. This is so important, particularly in a policy world and so on and so forth. But I think a policy world, a good policy analyst comes about if he or she is a good academic. So I think it's a continuation process and it's a cyclical process. So gender balance across the board, but I think it's important for institutions to have an institutional policy at the highest level, not to have manuals, and to have balanced and inclusive platforms.
Yeah, I think that's so rightly said, that a good policymaker is a good academician as well, and a good academician should be a good human as well. So,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, we look at this problem from another side. There is this sect of people who go to the other extreme and support vanels, that is, all women panels, as a means of countering manels. Do you agree with this kind of logic? And how urgent do you think there is a need to sensitize people on the priority for inclusion, not just as a male versus female issue, but more of a human issue?
No, I've seen this vinyl business also sort of gaining some traction, but I think we all need to recognize that it is not male against female, and therefore vinyls do not make sense to me. In fact, some of the organizations that have done these vinyls, when I talked to them, they said, and these are younger generation people whom I'm talked to in the last few months, and they say, oh, we just had an all women panel just the last week, and therefore it is okay. And I'm like, it is not okay. And similarly, I was talking to this one of the national law university, which was organizing again a complete manner. And I said, so I put it out on Twitter. So one of the women responded to me saying that we have so many women working behind the scene, and so you should not take such issues. I'm like, that is precisely my point. Why are women behind the organizing these panels and kind of thing, and not part of the? If you're all qualified people, why are you behind the scene organizing these panels? And so I think educating people across the board that panels do not make sense to me, and that behind the scene, because you are qualified, you are a qualified person, you should not be just organizing panels, but you should be part of the panels, and so on and so forth. So it is, I think, again and again, I think there is a need to emphasize inclusion, balance, diversity, and not exclusivity. So it's not, should not be an exclusive platform for men or an exclusive platform for women. Bringing different voices and different perspectives under one roof, I think that is so much healthier a practice, which is what we need to aim for, in a sense.
That's very true. I think it's only then that we can have the support of a larger section of society and truly fight this kind of a problem. Uh, we will move ahead a little in terms of talking about male domination in certain fields. Particularly in fields like international relations, defense, space, nuclear, and strategic technologies. As one of the few women experts, that people know, how has your experience been in terms of the attitudes of your male counterparts towards you during your professional interactions? And do you think it has changed over the years for the better?
Uh, More than 25 years ago, I came from Kerala to pursue my MPhil PhD program, and it may have been slightly better, because when I came to JNU for my higher studies, I did see a number of women, both faculty and students. Even though this field was dominated by men, I think that you still had a few role models. Professor Urmila Fadnes. There were a few women who were within the School of International Studies, for instance. So there was a bit of a little comfort seeing other women at top positions, senior professors, and so on and so forth. And after my MPhil, I joined IDSA, which is a Ministry of Defense funded think tank. Again, no women at the top leadership level, but I think there were a lot of women scholars. So colleagues, there were a number of them. Thereafter, I went to the NSCS, the National Security Council Secretariat, Government of India. And towards the end of my 5-year stint, there was Ambassador Leela Ponnappa, who was heading the organization, who was a deputy national security advisor. So in a sense, so I mean, I think in some sense, fortunate enough to see a lot of other women and not feel so isolated. And of course, but I think as you were growing up, you start recognizing these problems slowly. In the biggest, for instance, right in the earlier days, I think I tended to accept many of these things as a natural thing, that is extension of the patriarchal society and system that you have been part of in a sense. And therefore, I assume that, IR, security studies, technology, defense, these are issues that are to be done only by men. But it is very late in the day that I kind of, as one gets older, one tends to start questioning this dominance by men alone. And for me, I think this became particularly loud somewhere in my mid-career, when I started attending professional meetings and so on and so forth. For instance, when you want to when you want to intervene at a conference or something like that, first of all, you're ignored most of the time, because you don't look old, you don't have gray hair, and you are a woman, so you're avoided. Then there are a whole lot of situations where you make a comment and your comment is kind of ignored, but men go on to make the same comment, and then they are kind of tagged on, oh, Mr. So and so said, Dr. So and so said, but whereas the initial point was made by you, and that is completely kind of ignored in a sense. Initially, I think it was a lot of irritation, but then you start to wonder why this is happening and why this is the case, and you kind of start addressing by you kind of more fiercely write and so on and so forth, and take up these issues. But I think the journey has never been easy. Even when I came from JNU, for instance, I came from a provincial town. There was no support base for me here. There was absolutely no support. I didn't know anyone, and all my classmates, for instance, they all came from prominent colleges, prominent families, and so on and so forth. So, a certain amount of elite background, of course, I could sense there. I had to battle both, coming from a socially that provincial background, but again, that had nothing to do with gender. But when you're a woman, that's an added disadvantage in a sense. But I think this is something that everybody goes through in a sense, and you have to be convinced about what you're doing as to why you're doing. And there have been repeated incidents where people have tried to kind of, for instance, when I was, say, in the early 2000s, I was invited for a conference, but my director, he turned around and said, oh, you are not a senior person, so give me the paper, you should write the paper, but so-and-so particular old guy, he will go and make the presentation. I was like, I protested, and I said, I'll give you the paper, you can comment on it, you can give me a feedback, but I'm not going to give the paper for somebody else to go, some other old man to go and kind of. So I think these kind of experiences will go on and on and on, because I think, one, people try to box you into various things. Oh, you are a woman, you are not capable of doing defense studies or security studies, so you don't even get that opportunity. But I think you have to fight it out with your, one is that conviction of why you're doing what you're doing. Second, there is no substitute to hard work, and I think that's a battle that every woman will go through, I'm sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an ongoing struggle,
But
and
I think, yeah, I would just add that I think there were a number of sort of unexpected turns that came around also, because everything was not planned in a way. Whether it was my experience at the NSCS, the Government of India experience, or even went on later to, for instance, 2 years ago in 2018-19, I was privileged to be part of the UN group of governmental experts as a technical advisor to a group on PAROS. PAROS is the prevention of arms race in space. So I was part of that UNGG. I was associated with the UN Institute for Disarmament Research for a year. So these kind of, and of course, the STIP process was again something that I was honored and privileged to be part of, to be co-chairing that group on strategic technologies. So things, that's why I'm saying there is no substitute to hard work and publications when you're in the public policy field. So it does, merit will begin to show up at some stage, but these are struggles and disadvantages that a woman go through unfortunately in our society.
but definitely hard work and merit is what will pay, is what you're saying, and that's very nice to hear.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, ma'am, very often I wonder if the onus also lies with women themselves. Like, even though you've been through a lot of struggle, you've never given up. But very often these social cultural impacts generally decrease the confidence of women, and they validate stereotypes, that associate capability with masculinity and physical strength. And a man is considered more capable in terms of outgoing professions, like, let's say, national security. Often opportunities given to women are nothing more than tokenism. So how do you think institutions can get away with such practices?
No, absolutely. Women, as a woman, we always tend to doubt ourselves, doubt our capabilities. Because last month I was talking to one another organization, Ungender, which kind of does a lot of these, take up a lot of these issues. And when I was talking to her, the host was actually telling me, I've never come across a man who doubts himself and kind of things. But a woman, for instance, even at conferences, they'll say, okay, this may sound as a silly question, but I want to ask you so and so. So as a woman, we are always doubting ourselves. We doubt our capabilities. We doubt what we are. Oh, is that a good, is that a good question to ask, or is that a good comment to make, and so on and so forth. So we are always shaped by the surroundings, and where they are constantly, we are told that you cannot do military, you cannot engage in security studies, you cannot engage in technology, international relations, and so on and so forth. So we are being constantly conditioned for. But I think there are a couple of things. Like I said, don't go with fashion. One must have passion and courage of conviction, like I said, because I think the field that we choose, whether it is IR, security studies, national security, technology, military studies, anything, whatever field you choose, this is going to stick. You're going to be spending something like 30 years of your career or around there. So we have to be absolutely certain as to why we are doing what we are doing. So choose the path accordingly. In a very second is, of course, develop self-confidence. And I think that comes from the fact that, like a point I said, the courage of conviction. You have to be absolutely convinced as to why you are doing certain action, why you're taking certain action. If you have that courage of conviction, despite the kind of efforts by men or others to pull you down, I think you will have that confidence to pull through situations, because then you're certain as to why you're doing what you're doing. So the other important aspect is find mentors. I think especially female mentors and leadership people who are in leadership positions, finding good mentors and your own peers, a support group that you can lean on. And I think those are two very important things. One is to have the courage of conviction. Second is to have your own peers and good mentors who can give you the right advice, who can lead you in a certain, can give you directions to go. You can give you the different directions that you can choose from, and leave you with that freedom to kind of choose, in a sense. I think that is very, very important to me, because otherwise, you can kind of, you can lose your way, and more importantly, you lose the confidence that you can do something meaningful in a particular field, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to have that female role models, who can be good mentors, who can actually provide you with that confidence, and you can do it also. I think seeing other women in top positions who are leading by example, I think that's a great way to, for younger generation. Today's younger generation, when I look at them, they all are capable. They all seem to have very good ideas and what they want to do. But I think having a few women out there in in leadership positions, management positions, and so on and so forth, a peer, sort of as a sort of a senior peer, I think that's a very helpful for them to kind of steer the path ahead, and sort of follow their dreams, and kind of move ahead in a successful fashion.
That's so perfectly put, ma'am. I think we should also, focus a little more in terms of the conditioning, like you mentioned, which the family plays a very important role in, negating such stereotypes. Uh, we've discussed a lot in terms of all these aspects of manuals. But so speaking about the conditioning, like you mentioned, how important do you think is the role of family and parents in terms of, nurturing their children to make them such strong women who can negate criticism as well as bring them up? I would quickly
Yeah.
like to get your
Yeah,
thoughts on this.
absolutely. No, I've had a very supportive family all through my growing up. My parents, I have a brother, and my parents have always remained very, very supportive. So in that sense, I've been lucky to, they have given me the kind of freedom to choose. They never pushed me into a particular field, because especially coming from Kerala, where there is such a fascination for, either you should, if you're good in your studies, you will pursue medical or engineering. There's nothing else. And pursuing something in humanities, and that to political science, not even economics or not even kind of things, it was always seen as something, oh, you are not, oh, poor thing, not have been good in your studies, and that's why you went to political science. But I think I've had, for instance, my political science teacher, during my graduation days, she was so instrumental in me getting interested in political science, and thereafter branching off to international relations, and so on and so forth. Again, I think family plays a huge role, and I have a wonderful partner. in my marriage also. Having a partner at home as well makes a huge difference. So I think because it's not somebody, it's not one or the other. For instance, in my home, I think both of us are working. Both of us have equal responsibility in terms of managing home and finding a balance between work and home, in a sense, managing home. And I think so. Therefore, home front or family always is very important, both in terms of having a supportive family, your parents and your siblings, but it's also important once you're married and so on and so forth, what kind of partnership that you have at home, because otherwise it can kind of pull you down in a big way. You will not be able to find, because a lot of women at the end of the day who are entering this fields, at least in IR and security studies, I can say they leave halfway because they have a family preoccupation. In a sense, they have their family responsibilities which come in a much bigger way. They are not able to devote, and that affects your ability to make career progression, and that also affect your visibility, because if you are not able to write and publish and kind of thing, your visibility to the external world gets affected, and that in turn will affect your ability to be part of panels and kind of thing, because who are people, I always tell my juniors and my people who are working with me and kind of things that publications are the external face to your external face to the world. People will get to know you through your work first and foremost. So if you are not able to devote sufficient time on your work and kind of thing, and bogged down by, and most time it is only women who have dropped halfway their career because of family responsibilities. I do not come across so many men, many men who have said, I have family responsibilities and therefore I have to take a break from my work. I have not come across. So having a supportive family, both in terms of at the initial stages with your parents and siblings, at a later stage with your partners once you're married and so on and so forth, I think it's absolutely important. You need to call out for your space and be able to balance work and family commitments in an equal fashion.
Yeah, that is so well put, ma'am. And I think you managed to cover every aspect of in terms of inclusion and in terms of empowering women, much more than just talking about manuals. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today to discuss this very important issue. And this has indeed been a very enriching session with a complete 360-degree discussion. I would like to end this wonderful conversation in the words of Kofi Annan, who speaks of inclusion as much more than just a goal in itself. He calls it a precondition for meeting the challenge of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance. It was an absolute honor and pleasure talking to you, Dr. Raji. Thank you so much for so eloquently giving us a perspective of the dangers of manuals. Thank you
Yeah,
very
I
much.
would just say, this is so essential, because essentially at the end of the day, women make the other half of your population. So why should they not have a voice? Why should their voice not be heard? So thank you. Thanks so much. And thank you so much, Janice, for having me. And this has been a terrific conversation for me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.